Wir haben hier zu Gast Herrn Didier Saint-Georges. Er ist Mitglied des Investmentkomitees von Carmignac Gestion. Didier, in 2012 and 2013, the performance of Carmignac Patrimoine was lagging behind the competitors. What were the reasons for that? And much more important to our audience, can it happen again?
Well, the reasons why it happened are very, very clear, and we've been very public about it. In 2012, we took the view very early on during the year that the situation in Italy and Spain was extremely serious. There was a very clear danger of liquidity for the banking system, both in Italy and Spain. And it so happened that Mr. Draghi stepped in and saved the situation. But we considered that our job at Carmignac Patrimoine was not to hope and bet that Mr. Draghi would help our clients, but we considered that we should cover the risk. So because of that, when Mr. Draghi did do the trick of the whatever it takes, we lost a performance against those that had been very optimistic that it would happen and then outperformed the fund. In 2013, the reason is totally different. Where we lost performance was when Mr. Bernanke announced that tapering was coming, that the quantitative easing was coming to an end. We were convinced that this was too early. That in reality the US economy did not warrant such a fear that the interest rates would shoot up and that the emerging markets would suffer. In retrospect, it turned out to be right. Interest rates now are lower than they were at the time. Emerging markets have recovered. But it is a fact that we underestimated the way the markets reacted in June and July of 2013. And so, although the performance of the fund was good at the end of the year, still what we missed in June and July had a consequence. As a consequence, made Carmignac Patrimoine an underperforming fund compared to some competitors. So these are explanations, these are the facts. Now, do we feel bad about it? Frankly, not really. We are a conviction house, and the views we took at the time, we consider were the responsible decisions to make. And I like to point to a research report that was published by a UK journalist, David Stevenson, who writes for the Financial Times and has a website where he put the research, which was interesting because he looked at European funds throughout Europe. He used Morningstar data and he found 14 funds which over 15 years have greatly outperformed indices. And I'm glad to say Carmignac Patrimoine was one of them. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that he looked at the behavior of those top performing funds over the long run. And he found that all of them, without exception, went through periods of 1 year or 2 years of performance below trend. And it could be for different reasons, but the reality is when you want to generate really superior performance over the long run, it does mean that you take views and you will go through periods of underperformance. And the moral of the story is that when you are on those really long-term winning funds, some of the best opportunities to get in is precisely when you have a short period of underperformance. The whole key point is to make sure the fund is able to recover afterwards. And again, here I think 2014 has demonstrated that Carmignac Patrimoine is quite quick to recover after periods of underperformance.
Another topic that every investor is interested in who is investing in Carmignac funds. Edouard Carmignac has 67 years now. Is there any plan of succession? Can you uncover what will happen perhaps this year, next year? I don't know.
And the first thing I would say that it's not going to be this year or next year. Edouard Carmignac, I can testify, is in great shape, is very much involved every day in the fund management, and is putting as much pressure on all of us as ever. So there's nothing at all urgent at this stage. Now, in terms of a plan, yes, of course, a company like Carmignac, like any serious company, has a succession plan. And actually on this, Mr. Carmignac has been quite clear. The successor will be the best person for the job, could come internally or externally, but it will be based simply on the capacity to do the job. And what he's been very clear about as well is that the capital of the company will remain in the family. Mr. Carmignac and his family control about 3/4 of the company today, and that will remain as such. So it's something which is not at all an issue right now. There is a clear plan for succession in the future, and everybody is very relaxed about it at Carmignac.
Let's come to the markets. What does a company like Carmignac Gestion expect for a year like 2015 and beyond?
That's a very broad question, clearly. We are quite convinced that the global economy is going to remain in this very, very slow pace still for quite some time. We do not subscribe to what looks like a pretty widespread opinion that the US economy is accelerating, that because of Mario Draghi, the Eurozone is going to accelerate as well. We don't believe that. Our impression, according to our indicators, and we, as you know, we're a top-down house, so we do a lot of work on macroeconomics. Our view is that the world is more decelerating than accelerating. And in front of that, what you have is central banks being more and more and more accommodative. There's going to be a lot more liquidity brought to the market this year than there was last year or the previous years, even with the US central bank having stopped quantitative easing. But it's more than made up for by what is happening in Japan, in the European Central Bank, in the UK. So you have a battle really raging between the deflationary forces of deleveraging, slow growth, and central bank intervention. In this battle, the same recipes, I would think, will continue to work. What generated the performance of a fund like Patrimoine 2014 should continue to work this year. That is to say, on the equity side, you don't get fooled by the cyclical trick. You continue to recognize that what outperforms in this environment remains the companies that are not cyclical, the ones that are able to generate earnings growth irrespective of the economic cycle. The kind of stocks which in the 60s used to be called the Nifty 50. Now, they sometimes look expensive or even boring, but in reality, if you can find the ones that have decent growth, cash flow generation which supports dividend payment, they actually act almost as bond proxies with growth. And clearly in an environment of very low rates, a lot of liquidity and little growth, they tend to continue to outperform. So on the equity side, this is really the bulk of the portfolio construction, I would say, which will outperform. And on the fixed income side, the search for yield is exacerbated clearly by the banks, the central bank's behavior. And here one has to use the opportunities offered by a global approach. Clearly in Europe, on the sovereign bonds, the yields have become less and less attractive. And so we've taken a lot of profits here. Conversely, in the credit side, in the financial sector, they are still quite attractive bonds. Why? Because the central banks are making the banks less and less growth animals and more safe, highly capitalized animals. And so as much as we have no interest to be shareholders of European banks, we have a lot of interest to be lenders to those banks. So that's a capital allocation which should continue to do well. Finally, when you have very little growth and a lot of liquidity, you have inevitably volatility. A lot of liquidity and low growth, so you have volatility. And I would add one more thing, by the way, which is that the geopolitical environment, whether you're looking at Greece or Russia, you can have other black swans later on, you could ignore them when you have enough economic growth. It's like a bicycle. When the pace is very slow, you can get off balance by the smallest whiff of wind. Whereas when you have enough momentum, then you can face an external shock. right now, the slow growth makes the economies throughout the world more exposed to external shock. So that means that we will have to be quite agile, managing the exposure, reducing the risk when necessary. Like last October, for a few weeks, the markets got very worried that maybe after all, the central banks might not be able to do much about the economic cycle. So suddenly the markets get worried. Then they get reassured again. Being able to manage the risk profile of the fund by changing the equity exposure, you could make a big difference to performance. And I think that will continue to be the rule of the game as well as portfolio construction in 2015.
Last question, short answer, please. 8 years ago, if I remember well, it was the first time that Carmignac Gestion was here at the Fonds Professionel Congress. The fund Carmignac Patrimoine was something special, I would say. My question is, and many investors will ask that question, is it still such special, and what makes it still special, if yes?
It was difficult from inside to say what is special to compared to others. I would say there is one thing which probably was quite unique back in 2002, 2008, and remains unique today. And I've been working with this company in one capacity or another for 25 years. It is the approach to risk. There's one thing which we absolutely hate in the Carmignac culture. It is to make our clients lose money. And that is very much something which we feel deeply. Every morning when we get together for the investment committee around the table, we ask ourselves, are there risks to our clients' money here? And the reason why this fund, Carmignac Patrimoine, didn't lose money in 2002 when you had the meltdown following the internet bubble bursting, or 2008, or again in the summer of 2011, and who knows, 2015, could create such cases. The fact that we are so keen on risk management, we have the tools, we have the culture, we are very, very convinced that clients do expect us to manage the risk. I think that makes us quite special.
Thank you very much, Didier Saint-Georges.